Okay, Google, what's my name?
Your name is Rena.
And I'm here to present privacy attitudes of smart speaker users.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
So first, let's talk a little bit about this paper. This paper was written by Nathan Malkin, as well as his co-authors and his supervisors, Eagleman and David Widener. So these researchers come out of UC Berkeley, and particularly the BLUES Lab, Berkeley Laboratory for Usable and Experimental Security. It has been published in Privacy Enhancing Technologies conference proceedings. So in computer science, conference proceedings are often considered as good as journals in some cases. This particular conference has been running since 2015. It has a digital object identifier, and it is published open access online, and the publisher is Sciendo with D. Greider as the mother company. So overall, this paper is been cited by 3 people, but it is in a credible journal and by credible researchers. So overall, we're safe to trust what this paper may be saying. So before I start talking all about the results of the paper, let's talk a little bit about what is the Internet of Things, smart homes, smart speakers, and really what's the point of this technology? So it kind of stems from this idea that one day all of our devices are going to be connected. So it's the Internet of Things because everything, every little item, every appliance will be connected to the internet. Lost your keys? Don't worry, they're tile tagged. You need to get on a plane? Your boarding pass will be on your smartphone. You get up in the morning and your coffee machine turns on and your smart speaker starts to tell you the news. That's the idea behind the smart home movement. And companies are trying to push towards the smart home devices by creating these assistants that can do things like change your lights or be hooked up to smart plugs that can control a number of electrical components and have security features such as cameras that you can view even when you're not home. Monitor your plans, monitor your weight, find out what your schedule is, tell you the bus times. There's an endless amount of possibilities. So capitalizing on these products is, Amazon with their product Alexa, Google Home, and even Apple has its own version. There are also companies that make smart enabled devices, such as the Philips Hue light bulb, which lets you put lights on in the room in any variety and shades of color. So by connecting these devices together, you're hoping to create this ideal home environment. I already sound like an ad. So I'm going to give you guys a discussion warm-up question, and I'm going to come back to this. So I want you guys to think about how smart home devices or even smart home assistants you've had some experience with. So whether it be Siri on your iPhone, or maybe you do have Cortana on your desktop computer, think about these smart assistants and think about the way that you've used them. What kind of questions have you asked them? When's the last time you inspected your device history for these items? And how often are you having these kind of sensitive information, sensitive conversation, or maybe embarrassing searches through these voice-activated smart devices? After hearing some of the information presented in this paper via this presentation, I want to know if you guys still feel the same about your smart home devices and how many of you have or are about to change your smart home devices settings during this presentation or review your history. So this paper in particular presents quite an interesting methodology. what they did is they asked their participants to download this browser extension and install it. The browser extension accessed their device history, so their smart home device, which keeps a long log, and at this time, an indefinitely long log of your searches and your audio interactions on their backend database. And it actually took some of these recordings and some of these video clips and used it to personalize the survey or the questionnaire and get users to answer questions about specific voice clips in their history. So the paper promises to look at smart home devices and smart assistants, but really it's just looking at Alexa and Google Home. Researchers recruited participants via Mechanical Turk for this study. So Mechanical Turk is an online platform for micro tasks. So the idea is that this subset of users on Mechanical Turk that volunteered for this study are part of this bigger population of people who do some sort of mini task that can be done easier by a human than a computer and get paid a very small amount for it. So it could be something like circle the bus in the next 10 pictures, and for each picture we'll give you 10 cents. The idea is that these micro tasks are supposed to be something that a computer isn't good at. So a computer is not yet good at computer vision, or it needs a database full of pictures of buses in order for it to find out how to recognize buses in the next picture. But a human can easily say, oh yeah, a bus, circle. The survey was also targeted at the primary owners of the smart home device. So this is important because only the primary owner of the device really has the administration rights for the device. Of course, you can set up family share settings, but they're always secondary to the primary user. So they're really the person that has agreed, installed, and set up the device. So they've agreed to the terms and conditions, they've installed the software, and they have the main access to their device, their smart home assistant, via their phone. Researchers in total got a sample of over 100 participants. They actually looked a little bit at the statistics of their participant distribution, and they felt that it was gender distributed because 44% identified as female because genders are binary still. And on average, they reported the age of their users to be 34. And the majority of their users, so more than 80%, lived in a multi-person, 2 or more people household, with the average amount of users in a single household being about 3 users. So when they broke down what assistants were available in each home, they found that 30%, approximately 31%, had Google Home, and another 69% used Amazon Alexa. This is actually congruent with the market and the current sales in the time of the publication of this paper, 2019. So they considered that their sample was representative of consumer trends in the current time. And this trend really does seem to hold up today. We do have the majority of smart device users leaning towards Amazon Alexa. The lower price point is an obvious contributor to this, but it's also a bit with the marketing and the available features. Some of the other differences between the smart home devices include the environment in which you have already set up your other smart home devices or services on. So for example, if you are already an Android user, Google Home might make more sense. But if you're a user of an iPhone and you don't want to go with the iHome or iHomePod Apple version of the Smart Assistant user, possibly because of price point, you might consider going with Alexa, which has already support for iTunes and iMusic platform players. In their pre-results section, which they call data summary, the authors give us a breakdown of some typical device usage. So they said that approximately 7% of the recordings were children using the device. This is something they were less interested in. Again, they wanted the primary device user. About 15% of the recorded history only had the wake word. 14% of audio requests were for media, so play this song, play this podcast. About 11% was controlling that media, so volume up, volume down. Another 7% is home control, 5% news and weather, and then another 5% timer. So they define their scope as not being typical data use and actually refer to another paper in their data summary section to point to how typical users will activate, interact, and use their devices. But they do make these statistics known, probably because they want to identify the types of interactions that they are interested in and not this typical use summary that they've given us. The results of their study actually start with accidental recordings. So these are any recordings which are triggered by an event other than the wake word, such as noise in the background, TV, radio, music, or wake word activated but unintentional activations. So what I mean here is when you are not directly addressing the device, but you did say the wake word. So, for example, participant 22 in the study explains that they have a friend who's also named Alexa, and that their Amazon Echo Dot thinks that it's being called every time they say their friend's name. They then continue by asking their users a series of different questions that try and tease out their perceptions of their data retention. So what do they think happens to their data? As well as the current policies and the user's opinion on policies once they are informed of the policies. So how is data actually retained for these users and what do they think of these retention policies? And then it goes on to discussing information such as data deletion tools, privacy tools, and then kind of looks more at how do users access these tools and why. So we start here with the first question: what do you, the user in this study, believe happens to the audio of your interaction? So about 48% of users answered that it is kept indefinitely. This is actually the correct answer. However, more than 50%, so about 52% of users, actually answered incorrectly, saying that it was either temporary, which was the majority of the incorrect answers, or that it was not stored or they didn't know. So this is a really interesting breakdown, but also somewhat unexpected breakdown. So at the time this paper was published in 2019, but before the camera ready, so before the final published version was released, Google actually did shift from having indefinite time period of data storage to automatic deletion after a certain time frame. And soon after, Amazon followed suit. However, at the time that the data was collected, the users who answered anything other than kept indefinitely would be incorrect. So after collecting this information, they then asked users about current data retention policies. And they got, of course, a wide variety of answers. So participant 80 said they had no idea the recordings were stored and would have preferred they'd been deleted, saying that they were shocked to hear the child's voice on the recording. And then you have people who are like participant 111, who is after my heart as a researcher, says, I think having recording stored may help with the technology and we all have to do our part to advance it. Thank you. As a user researcher, definitely feel that there's an advantage to that. However, as a consumer, and as someone interested in privacy and security of technology and how users understand privacy online, I'm a little concerned. The next series of questions asked, how would you feel if, and then it provided some sort of question as well as a timeline. So the first one, and probably the most focused one in this paper for this type of question, is how long can the audio recording be stored, and how would you feel about that in terms of acceptability? So here we have red for unacceptable and blue for acceptable. Could have used green, but they used blue. And the idea was that users were actually more comfortable with shorter time spans. So 90.8% of recordings that users were presented with during the study got the response that for that recording, it would be acceptable for companies to keep for about 1 week. The number was immediately dropped from almost 91% to 57.7% for a retention period of 1 week. And then participants were most unhappy with recordings being stored forever. They rated that this was completely or somewhat unacceptable for 47.4% of the recordings. So that being said, the next question that was probed via this study was, what is the current data retention policies? And given that these current data retention policies exist for your provider of the service, so in this case Google or Amazon, do you want to delete this recording? Have you deleted these recordings? Are you even aware that there are recording deletion tools? So overall, there was a lot of sort of answers ranging from yes and no, but of course everything in between, and a lot of people who were not quite sure of how this data retention policy worked. So overall, we can kind of say no, they do not generally want to delete their recordings. Although that doesn't mean that users didn't present concerns about having the recordings on there. So there was another range of responses here, and we can see that just from the first bar graph presented here, or column graph if you prefer, that over 60 users, and that is quite a high number compared to the next highest value of 20 users. But the first largest category, those 60 users, over 60 users, did not record any fraction of their recordings. So 52% of participants do not want to delete any of the recordings they were presented with. That was presented within the results section. And then 44.8% of participants said they would delete at least one recording. However, not all recordings were judged to be a privacy risk. So about 26% of the interactions that were shown were marked for deletion. Interestingly enough, the authors identified sort of a bimodal distribution of either they did not want to delete any recordings or users wanted to delete all of the recordings. So they called this the all or nothing approach. And they said that a slight majority, 55% of users, did not want to delete any of the recordings they were presented with. A sizable minority, 13.8%, wanted their recordings deleted regardless of content. So one participant that summarized their attitude within this quote was quoted by the paper authors, and participant 43 said, though this particular recording does not include any private information, I would like to delete all of my recordings soon after they make them. So the next question is, why are people deleting these recordings? So we see here table 2, common deletion reasons as a percentage of respondents who deleted at least one recording and a percentage of responses marked for deletion. So the idea here is that these percentages, which seem rather high, are only looking at people who actually deleted at least one recording. So that first column in our column chart of over 60 users are all being left out. And now we're only looking at people who have actually deleted something. So in terms of the most cited reason was there's no need or no reason to keep it. The next most cited reason was I don't want anything stored. Other things that participants said that they were uncomfortable with was if a recording was not intended for the assistant, so for the accidental recordings or the accidental wake words, if it was a recording of their children, or if it was a recording of their guests. And this is actually really interesting because the authors actually say that one of the main takeaways of their study is that people were more protective of data that comes from children and other people than they were of their own data. From the results of the study, they said that 72% of participants reported having no privacy concerns, with this very familiar statement, I'm not a person that really. So the results of this paper is quite interesting, and they showed that there are current privacy concerns based on the different sharing scenarios. So users actually change their opinion on whether. So the next question that the study really asks now is, what are the current privacy tools and are users using them? So if we looked at the very simple question, do you delete recordings? We see almost 70% report that they knew that they could but haven't. 29% saying that they've occasionally deleted recordings, and only 3.5% of users saying that they actually do. However, users had a lot of opinions on what should be deleted automatically. So they felt that anything that was personal, sensitive, should be immediately deleted, and that was reported by 20% of the users. But almost 16.5%, is almost 20%, said nothing should be automatically deleted. Another 15.5% said children. And then, of course, it goes down the list with anything from financials to sexual topics to absolutely everything, specific personal information, searches, specific people speaking, and so on and so forth. However, I do want to point out that a lot of these reasons for automatic deletion are very subjective. So, for example, what is a personal and sensitive query to you, right? And what do you consider embarrassing content? So one of the participants actually explains, so P21, I would want my children screened out. Again, recognizing a child's voice or recognizing any commands around shopping and banking, including items, account numbers, passwords, bank names, etc., according to P40, should be deleted if they are accidentally captured. And then, of course, some participants, such as P77, said, I'd want to delete anything that is not directly speaking to Alexa for a command. Any extra conversations should be deleted. So a lot of these users expect that there's a little bit more potential computing power that can be done on these devices or on the back end to delete these recordings. But a lot of times, a recorded accidental video clip, or sorry, voice clip, is not due to there being, a lot of times the accidental recording is captured because the device doesn't know any better, and not necessarily because the data set or the data algorithms that do the analysis or even the human users can understand that the wake word wasn't said. So there's a huge sort of gap in expectations and device capabilities between both users and companies. So this is kind of really interesting to look at as people taking this course who might go on to later design or help produce or research and develop these sort of smart home devices for a company or maybe even for a startup or just for research purposes. And of course, us as consumers and what we understand these devices to be capable of and to do. After reviewing the main results of this study, we can now look back on the main contribution of this paper. So this paper promises to review the privacy attitudes of smart speaker users, or more specifically, the privacy attitudes of Google Home and Alexa users. And even more specifically, we might say users who are already on mTurk, who are the primary or the admin users, and already have device. Moreover, attitudes here is the next part that we want to talk about. What does it mean when we talk about attitudes? Now that we have reviewed the Internet of Things, we've talked a little bit about the methodology, and we've talked a little bit about the results. Well, really, what this paper is discussing is something called the privacy paradox. So the privacy paradox is very simply the recorded mismatch that's well documented in the literature and well referenced literature is included in the paper. And it states that the expressed attitudes about online privacy don't match the behaviors, choices, and actions that users make online. So what this means is that I might say that I personally am super uncomfortable with being video recorded, but here I am in this presentation being video recorded. That paradox is what we are describing when we talk about the privacy paradox. The idea that we might believe that we are actually being safe or that we have safe practices online, but in truth, we are not practicing safe behaviors or privacy-aware behaviors. So really the question becomes why? So is it a sense of literacy in terms of computers? Do users not understand what's going on? Is there a lack of comprehension? Maybe the user really trusts the company that they're providing the information to. Maybe they trust Google, for example, with their recordings, or they did not read the terms and conditions. They were unaware of the danger. They underestimated the value of their data because they have nothing to hide. Or maybe they are okay and find targeted advertising useful. So there's a lot of reasons why this paradox might occur, and this research is contributing to that research on what users really understand about privacy and security. So it becomes a real overwhelming question. How do we get users to understand? So in the paper, they discuss quite a few topics. So the first one they wanted to talk about is ignorance of privacy controls. So often it can be very difficult. So this was Privacy Attitudes of Smart Speaker Users by Malkin et al. 2019. And I'm Rena Webby. Thank you so much for listening. And